Board meeting. Board meeting. A forbidden office romance on ice. Hadley Prescott. Copyright 2026 Hadley Prescott. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except for brief quotations in a book review. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. First edition, 2026. For everyone who ever fell and got back up. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Alan Watts. Contents. Prologue. Chapter 1. New Ice. Chapter 2. Target acquired. Chapter 3. First Blood. Chapter 14. Brody. Chapter 5. The Seminar. Chapter 6. Static. Chapter 17. Ask Him. Chapter 18. All is Lost. Chapter 9. The Rink. Chapter 10. The Door. Chapter 11. Fault Lines. Chapter 12. The Seminar Ends. Chapter 13. Choosing. Chapter 15. Night Game. Chapter 16. Chapter 19. Chapter 23. Choosing Again. Chapter 21. Chapter 22. Chapter 24. Epilogue. Spring Ice. Prologue. Cole's POV. The ice doesn't lie. That's the first thing my dad ever taught me. I was 6 years old, standing at the boards in rental skates 2 sizes too big, and he crouched down to my level, the only time I remember him doing that, and said it like it was scripture. The ice doesn't lie, Cole. You either have it or you don't. And if you don't, I'll know. I was 6. I already understood what that meant. It's 5 a.m. The rink is dark except for the overhead lights I flipped on when I came in, the ones above center ice that buzz for 30 seconds before they hold. I was already on the ice before they steadied. I know this rink the way I know my own lungs. Every scratch, every soft patch near the left boards where the Zamboni always misses, the slight drag at the far blue line that's been there since freshman year. Nobody else notices it. I notice everything. I push off the boards and skate. No drill. No plan. Just the sound of my blades and the cold pressing in from every direction. It's October 3rd. The season starts in 11 days. That should be the only thing in my head right now. Instead, I'm thinking about the scout report my dad forwarded to me 2 nights ago. No message. Just the file, and underneath it, his email signature. Marcus Callahan, NHL alumni, Callahan Sports Management. Like I could forget who he was. Like the signature was there to remind me in case I did. I read the report 4 times. I already knew what was in it. I've been building toward it since I was 10 years old, every practice, every game, every summer I spent training while other kids were at the lake. I knew what the scouts looked for. I knew where I ranked. I'd been ranked since I was 15. That was just the way things worked when you were Marcus Callahan's son. I take a sharp corner and feel the ice respond underneath me, every adjustment automatic, my body doing what it's been doing for 16 years without being asked. Out here it's clean. Out here everything makes sense. I push left, then right, build up speed down the far side, and for about 30 seconds the only thing that exists is the motion and the cold air hitting my face and the scratch and bite of the blades. Then it's gone. And I'm just Cole again, doing laps at 5 in the morning because I can't sleep. I haven't slept a full night since August. I don't tell people that. I don't tell people much of anything. I've got 18 guys on this roster who would follow me into a wall if I asked them to, and not one of them actually knows me. That's not an accident. I built it that way. Captain for 2 years, and every single one of those guys thinks I'm exactly what I look like, certain, controlled, untouchable. They need to believe that. A team doesn't follow someone who shows them cracks. My dad taught me that too. I stop at center ice and stand still. Something I never do when anyone else is around. I just stand there and let the quiet press in, and I breathe it out slow, the weight of the season, the scout report with no message, the voice in the back of my head that sounds exactly like my father's. You haven't won anything yet. The only thing worse than a prospect is a prospect who peaks early. The buzzer of the overhead light hums. One of the far ones is starting to go, it flickers every morning now, a pale yellow pulse over the south goal. I've mentioned it to the facilities manager twice. It hasn't been fixed. Some things don't get fixed. They just keep flickering until they go out. I start moving again. Forward, then backward, switch, pivot, the way I've done 1,000 times. In a game I'm reading 6 things at once: ice position, the play, my line, the defense, the clock, where the puck is going before it gets there. Right now I'm reading nothing. Right now there's just this. The thing nobody tells you about being good at something from the time you're a child is that it stops being yours at some point. It becomes everybody else's thing that you happen to be inside of. I can't remember the last time I played hockey because I wanted to. I play because I'm built for it. Because Marcus Callahan's son doesn't walk away from a full scholarship and a clean shot at the draft. Because there are 11 guys in this conference who would take my spot tomorrow if I gave them the opening. Because if I stopped, I don't know what would be left. I do one more full lap, hard and fast, pushing until my lungs start to burn and my thighs ache and there's nothing inside me but the effort. Then I coast to a stop at the boards and lean against them and breathe. The rink is still empty. Still mine. In 3 weeks the season starts. In 3 weeks my dad comes up for the home opener and stands exactly where he always stands, far right, near the penalty box, arms crossed, face giving nothing. In 3 weeks I'll be performing again for an audience of 1. I look down at my gloves. Pull them off one at a time and dig my fingers into the laces of my right skate, tightening them another half turn even though they don't need it. Then the left. Then I pull the gloves back on. I don't know why I do that. I've done it since I was 12. Lace them tighter before something hard. Like if I cinch down enough, nothing can shake loose. I push off the boards one more time and head back to center ice. 11 days until the season. 11 days until it starts again, the performance, the pressure, the face that never slips, the captain who doesn't crack. The ice holds every blade mark in silence. It doesn't carry the weight I bring to it. It doesn't ask what I need. It just holds me up, flat and honest, the same every single morning. My dad was right about one thing. The ice doesn't lie. Everything else does. End of. Chapter 1. New ice. Dakota's POV. Nobody warned me about the dining hall. They warned me about the winters. The financial aid office lady said it twice: make sure you pack for upstate New York, it gets brutal up there, like I'd never seen snow before. The housing coordinator warned me the dorms were old and the hot water ran cold after 7 a.m. My mom called 4 times on the drive up and warned me about everything else, all the things moms warn you about when they're scared and don't know how to say it. Nobody said a word about where you sit. I found out the hard way. It was my 3rd day at Frost Academy. I'd missed orientation by a week because my scholarship paperwork processed late, so I was already behind. No campus tour, no welcome breakfast, no laminated map with the dining hall color-coded by section. I just walked in at noon on a Tuesday with my tray and my bag and my coffee that had gone cold somewhere between the humanities building and here, and I looked for an empty seat. There was one at the end of a long table near the window. I sat down. I didn't notice the hockey jerseys right away. I had my laptop open before I'd even taken off my coat, and I was reading back through the sports ethics syllabus I'd gotten from Professor Aldridge's office that morning, making notes in the margins. The table was loud the way a group of guys who've never once wondered if they belong somewhere are always loud, but I'd grown up with 2 brothers. Loud didn't register. Hey. I looked up. The guy standing at the end of the table was built like a door. Dark hair, square jaw, the kind of good-looking that comes packaged with the knowledge that it's useful. He had a Frost Academy Blades jersey on, number 17, and he was looking at me the way people look at something they've already decided is a problem. "You're in the wrong section," he said. I looked at him. Then I looked at the table. Then I looked back at him. There's no sign, I said. There doesn't need to be a sign. Then how was I supposed to know? He pulled out the chair across from me and put both hands flat on the table and leaned in. Not aggressive exactly, more like a demonstration. Look how much space I can take up. Look how little space you have. Everyone knows, he said. This is the team table. Has been for 3 years. So pick up your stuff and find somewhere else. I didn't move. Something in his face shifted, a small, sharp recalibration. Like he'd pressed a button that always worked and this time the machine didn't respond. Did you hear me? I heard you, I said. I'm thinking. The table went quiet. Not all at once, it happened in a wave, conversations dropping off one by one as people noticed what was happening. I kept my eyes on the guy in front of me. I didn't know his name yet. I found out later it was Brody Walsh. I wish I'd known it then, because I would have written it down somewhere as a warning to myself. You're thinking, he repeated, like the word tasted wrong. I looked back at my laptop. I've got a seminar at 2 and I haven't finished the reading. So either get me a different seat with an outlet or give me 10 minutes and I'll move on my own. Those are your options. Someone at the far end of the table made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly swallowed. Brody straightened up. The easy confidence he'd walked in with was still there, but there was something under it now, something tighter. You don't know who you're talking to. You're right, I said. I don't. We haven't been introduced. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Brody. The voice came from across the room. Low, flat, carrying without trying, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the room already knows to listen. I looked up before I meant to. He was standing near the far wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, pale eyes that I clocked as blue from 20 feet away. He had a black Blades jacket on and a cup of coffee in one hand, and he was looking at Brody with an expression that wasn't quite anything. Not angry. Not amused. Just watching. Brody looked at him. Something passed between them, fast, coded. Then the tall one's eyes moved to me. I don't know how long it lasted. 3 seconds maybe. 5. He looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to figure out, not with hostility exactly, not with anything I had a clean name for. Just that flat, measuring look. Like he was running the numbers on something. I met it straight on. Is this your table or his? I said. Because you look like you could use the space. Silence. Real silence this time, the kind that has weight. Someone at the table stopped chewing. I heard a chair scrape. Brody had gone completely still. The tall one said nothing. Not a word. He just looked at me for another second, and something changed behind his eyes, a small shift, so fast I almost missed it, and then he looked back down at his coffee. That was it. That was the whole thing. But the table stayed quiet, and Brody straightened up and walked back to his seat without another word to me, and I looked back at my laptop and read 2 more pages of the sports ethics syllabus while my heart kicked against my ribs in a way I absolutely refused to show. 10 minutes later I packed up and left. Not because anyone told me to. Because I'd said I would, and I keep my word even when nobody's watching. I walked out of the dining hall with my bag on my shoulder and my cold coffee in my hand, and I didn't look back. Mara was already in the room when I got back. She was on her bed with a legal pad covered in case notes, highlighter behind one ear, reading glasses on, entirely in her own world. She looked up. Took one look at my face. What happened? Nothing. I dropped my bag and sat on my bed. I sat at the wrong table. The hockey table. I looked at her. There's a hockey table. There are 3 of them. She pulled the highlighter out from behind her ear. The team's been running this campus since before we got here. They've got 2 championship banners in the gym, a booster fund with more money in it than the English department, and apparently a signed agreement with God that the middle section of the dining hall belongs to them. She paused. Did someone give you trouble? Someone tried. Brody Walsh. Big guy. Number 17. Yeah, that's Brody. She said it the way you say the name of a weather system, tropical storm, category 2, expect some disruption. And the one watching from across the room. I looked up. How did you know someone was watching? Because Brody doesn't do anything without an audience, and the audience he performs for is one person. She went back to her legal pad. Cole Callahan. Team captain. Junior. His dad played in the NHL for 9 seasons and never lets anyone forget it. She underlined something on the page. They basically run this place. The hockey team, I mean. Which is why I eat at 11:30 and avoid the dining hall between noon and 2. I sat with that for a second. He didn't say anything, I said. Callahan. He just looked at me. Mara glanced up over the rim of her glasses. Yeah. That's worse. I knew she was right. I'd known it standing there in the dining hall with his eyes on me, that particular quality of silence that isn't absence, it's the opposite of absence. It's someone paying complete attention while giving you absolutely nothing back. I told Brody he could use the space, I said. Mara stared at me. While Callahan was standing right there. While he was standing right there. She put down the highlighter. Dakota. He didn't tell me to move. I lay back on my bed and looked at the ceiling. The water stain up there looked like the state of Michigan. I'd been staring at it since my first night. He just looked at me like he was deciding something. Mara was quiet for a moment. And I closed my eyes. I didn't like how that felt. End of Chapter 2. Target acquired. Cole's POV. I let it go for exactly 4 hours. That's longer than anyone would think, knowing me. I'm not a person who sits with things. I handle them, clean, fast, no residue. Something disrupts the order of how things run, I correct it. That's been true since freshman year when I took the captaincy early and had to figure out what kind of captain I was going to be. My dad had opinions about that too. But I let the dining hall thing sit for 4 hours because part of me recognized, somewhere below the surface where I keep things I don't want to look at, that it wasn't a simple correction. She hadn't been hostile. She hadn't been performing for anyone. She just didn't move. And then she said what she said, and I didn't respond, and she walked out on her own terms, and I spent the next 4 hours convincing myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was 6 o'clock. I was at the desk in my room trying to read a nutrition report the team trainer had sent through when Jens Nachten came in without waiting, which he always does, because Jensen Nakamura has never once in his life worried about whether he's welcome somewhere. You're doing the face, he said. I don't have a face. The face you do when something happened that you're not talking about. He dropped into the chair by the window and stretched his legs out. Brody told me about the dining hall. I turned a page. There's nothing to tell. Transfer girl. Sat at the table, wouldn't move, said something to you. Said something near me. Jens was quiet for a second. He does that, goes quiet in a specific way that means he's deciding whether to push it. What did she say? Nothing important. Brody says she told you to your face that you needed more space. Brody has a loose definition of what constitutes an insult. Cole. Jens leaned forward on his elbows. He's the only person on the team who talks to me like an actual person and not a rank. Sophomore year I almost told him to stop. I'm glad I didn't. She's a transfer student on scholarship. She didn't know the table. It's not a thing. I know it's not a thing. So you're going to leave it? I looked at him then. Just for a second. He sat back. You're not going to leave it. She walked into my dining hall, sat at my table, and when Brody asked her to move, she started quoting her schedule at him. I heard how it sounded even as I said it. Small. Petty. The kind of thing Marcus Callahan would look at me sideways for. It's not about that. It's about what happens if everyone decides the rules don't apply to them. She's one person, not a policy statement. One person is how it starts. Jens looked at the ceiling. It was the look he gets when he disagrees with me but has already decided he's not going to win. He stood up. Just, don't make it a whole thing, okay? The season starts in 10 days. We don't need noise. There won't be noise. He left. I waited about 4 minutes and then I opened the campus directory. I told myself I was confirming she was actually enrolled. That's a reasonable thing to check. If someone is disrupting team space, you verify they belong there. It's due diligence, not whatever Jens would call it if he knew. Her name was Dakota Price. Transfer from Haverton State, one of those small public schools 4 hours south. Academic scholarship, sports ethics seminar, second year standing. Student ID photo that told me nothing. She was looking slightly to the left of the camera like she'd gotten tired of waiting for it. I looked at it longer than I needed to. There was something about her face that was hard to land on, not beautiful in a way that you processed and moved past, but the kind of face that made you want to keep looking because you hadn't figured out yet what you were looking at. Sharp jaw. Eyes that even in a bad student photo looked like they were watching something more carefully than the situation required. She'd looked at me like that in the dining hall. Straight at me, no flinch, no calculation. Just looking. Like I was a problem she was working out. I closed the directory. Brody knocked at 9. He came in already talking, which he does when he's got an idea he's excited about. He leads with the energy so you're already inside the plan before you've agreed to it. So the transfer girl, he said. Her name is Dakota Price. He stopped. Gave me a look I couldn't fully read. You looked her up. I verified enrollment. I picked up my phone. Put it back down. What about her? He dropped onto my couch and laced his hands behind his head. She made you look soft in front of the whole table, man. You just stood there. I chose not to respond. From the outside those looked the same. He shrugged. I think we should make her feel a little less welcome. Nothing serious. Just enough to remind her where she landed and who was already here. I should have said no. Jens's voice was still in my head, don't make it a whole thing, and I knew he was right in the way that I always know when Jens is right, which is quietly and without admitting it. I said, fine. The word was out before I'd finished deciding. Brody nodded, already satisfied, already moving on to something else. I looked at my phone. At the directory still open in the browser. It sat wrong for about 3 seconds. A specific wrongness, not guilt exactly, more like a sound that's slightly off-key. Close enough to write that you almost don't notice. Almost. I closed the browser. 3 seconds, and then I put it away, that feeling, down into whatever part of me I'd built specifically to hold things I wasn't going to look at. I was very good at that. I'd been doing it my whole life. End of. Chapter 3. First Blood. Dakota's POV. I know what IT looks like when someone is trying to break you. I've seen it before. I know the shape of it, how it starts small, almost deniable, something you could explain away if you wanted to. An accident. A coincidence. Just bad luck, maybe. That's what they're counting on. That you'll talk yourself out of what you know. I don't do that anymore. It was a Thursday, 8 days into the semester. I had a chemistry of sport exam Friday morning, one of the 2 science credits I needed to satisfy the transfer requirements, and I'd spent 3 days building a set of notes I was genuinely proud of. Color-coded tabs. Condensed summaries on index cards. A timeline on the back of 2 pages taped together. I'm not naturally a science person. Those notes were the result of 8 hours of work across 4 days. I left them in the library. 10 minutes. I went to the bathroom and stopped at the water fountain and was back in 10 minutes, and the table where I'd been sitting was empty. Bag still there. Laptop still there. Notes gone. I stood there for a second and breathed. Then I went looking. It didn't take long. Someone wanted me to find them, that was the whole point. They were pinned to the bulletin board outside the hockey team's locker room in the east wing of the athletic building, spread out across the full width of the board like a display. Every page. Every index card. Each one stamped in red ink with a single word. Transfer. 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 I stood in front of that board for a long time. The hallway was empty. The locker room was quiet. There was nobody to perform anything for, so I didn't perform anything. I just stood there and felt the cold, clean weight of knowing exactly what this was and exactly who was behind it. Then I took out my phone and photographed every single page. Front, Back, the stamp, the pins, the board, the hallway sign above it. 41 photos. I took my time. Then I unpinned every page, stacked them in order, and put them back in my bag. I walked back to the library. I sat back down. I studied for 3 more hours. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because it wasn't what happened. What happened was colder than that and cleaner. Something that had been soft in me, some small remaining hope that this school would just be a school, that I could just be a student, that I was done with this particular kind of thing, went hard and quiet. Like water freezing. You can almost hear it if you're paying attention. I heard it. That night I sat at the desk in our room with my notebook open to a blank page. I wrote one name in the top margin. I drew a circle around it. Cole Callahan. I put the pen down and looked at it. Behind me, Mara came in from the library, dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes. She looked at me. Then at the notebook. "What happened?" she said. "Someone took my exam notes from the library and pinned them to the hockey bulletin board with the word transfer stamped on every page." She was very still for a moment. "All of them? All 41? Did you report it?" "No. Dakota. Reporting it does nothing. I'd learned that before. I knew exactly what reporting got you, a meeting with someone whose job was to make the problem small enough to manage, a follow-up email that said we take these matters seriously, and then nothing. Nothing except that now the people who did it knew you'd gone looking for help, which meant they knew exactly where your edges were. I photographed everything first. I have documentation. I'm not going to use it yet." Mara sat on her bed. She was looking at me with something careful in her face, not pity, which I wouldn't have taken well, but something more like assessment. Like she was measuring the distance between what I was saying and how I was saying it. "Yet," she repeated. "Yet." She looked at the notebook. At the circled name. "Is that Callahan?" "He didn't do it himself. He approved it." I was certain about that without being able to explain exactly why. The dining hall. The way he'd stood there and weighed me and come to some conclusion behind his eyes while his face gave nothing. This had his fingerprints on it even if his hands were clean. He runs everything on that team. Nothing happens without him knowing. "So what are you going to do?" I looked at the name in the margin. At the circle around it, neat and deliberate. "I met the guy I'm going to ruin," I said. Mara was quiet for a beat. "Then, not if he ruins you first." I closed the notebook. "He's going to try," I said. "There's a difference." She looked at me for another second and then she nodded, once, slowly, like she'd decided something. She pulled her legal pad back out and went back to work. I opened my chemistry notes and kept studying. Here's what I didn't tell Mara. Here's what I don't tell anyone, because it's mine and I've earned the right to hold it privately. This wasn't the first time. My last school, Haverton State, an hour and a half from my mom's house, the school I'd been at for a year before I transferred, had a version of this. Different players, same game. A group of guys who decided I was a problem that needed managing. It started small there too. Something misplaced. A comment here and there. The kind of thing you second-guess yourself about, because maybe you're reading it wrong, maybe you're too sensitive, maybe it's nothing. It wasn't nothing. It got bad enough that I left. I packed my room in 2 days and drove home and sat in my childhood bedroom for 3 weeks trying to figure out who I was outside of the thing that had happened. I applied to Frost Academy because they had a scholarship that fit and a sports ethics program that interested me and because it was far enough from Haverton that no one would know my name. I came here thinking I was done with it. So here's the thing about having nothing left to lose. People think it makes you fragile, like if you've already been broken once, you're easier to break again. They've got it backwards. When you've already been through the worst version of this, when you've already lost the thing you thought you couldn't survive losing and you survived it anyway, the threats stop working. You look at what someone is trying to take from you and you think, I've lost more than this. I'm still here. Cole Callahan circled me in that dining hall. Decided I was a target. He doesn't know what I am yet. He's about to find out. End of Chapter 14. Brody. Cole's POV. I heard the name by accident. I was coming out of the locker room on a Thursday morning, post-practice, early, the hallway mostly empty, and Brody was around the corner on his phone, not low enough, not expecting anyone. I caught maybe 4 seconds of it before he saw me and ended the call. A girl's name. Not one I knew. And then something else, a location, or part of one, the name of a school or a program, I wasn't sure. It didn't fully land. I had too much in my head and it was one fragment of a sentence from a conversation I'd walked in on the tail end of, and Brody looked at me when he pocketed his phone and said, "Trainer, change the tape session," and I said fine and we both walked toward the ice. It sat somewhere. Not at the surface, I didn't have room at the surface. The scout visit was 11 days out. My dad had called twice in 5 days, which was a new frequency. The season record was good but not clean, 1 loss, 1 tie, both in games where my face-off percentage had dropped below where it needed to be. Harlan had pulled me aside Wednesday after practice and said, "You're in your head," and I'd said I was fine, and he'd looked at me for a moment and said, "Get out of it." I was trying. The thing that was keeping me in my head was not something I could have explained to Harlan because it was not hockey-shaped. It was library-shaped. It was the particular texture of a Friday evening with a political theory textbook and the wrong coffee that was now the right coffee and 40 minutes of quiet that was louder than most conversations I'd had all semester. I'd gone back to the library twice since the project ended. Same table. She'd been there both times. We hadn't talked much beyond the goodbye at the end and the one exchange about talking, which I'd meant exactly as I'd said it. Sitting across from someone was a kind of conversation. It said things. I was never going to explain that out loud, but it was true. Both times she'd used my name when she left. I was aware of how much I'd started waiting for that. I was not going to look at that directly. Jens found me after the Thursday afternoon skate, falling into step beside me on the way back to the dorm with his bag over his shoulder and steam coming off him in the cold air. He'd been quieter than usual all week. I'd noticed and said nothing, because with Jens the quiet usually resolved itself into whatever he was actually going to say when he was ready to say it. He was ready on Thursday. "The library," he said. I looked straight ahead. "What about it?" "Twice this week. Once last week." He wasn't asking. He'd been paying attention the way he always paid attention, low-key, thorough, from an angle you didn't notice until it was too late. "You're not there for the books." "I have academic requirements." "Cole." I kept walking. "The door thing was 6 weeks ago," he said. "The notes." "The whiteboard." You pulled back and I thought, okay, he's done with it. He came to his senses. He paused. "But this is something else. It's not a thing. It's something you've never done before. That makes it a thing." He shifted his bag. "Whatever you're doing with her, either do it right or stop." I said nothing. "She's got no backup here. She transferred in alone, she doesn't know how this campus runs, she's been dealing with whatever we started for 6 weeks. His voice wasn't heated. Jens never got heated, which somehow made it worse. "If you go to that library and sit across from her twice a week and let her think it's one thing when you don't actually mean it, that's worse than the notes, Cole. That's meaner than anything Brody did." The cold was sharp. My bag was heavy on my shoulder. "I hear you," I said. "Do you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. We walked half a block before he said anything else. "You know what you are when you're not trying," he said. "When you're not running the captain thing, not managing the room, not doing the face." I didn't answer. "You're someone she might actually like." He said it flat and even, like it was just information. "Not the version you show people. The actual you. That person, she could like him." He looked over at me. "So figure out which one you want to be. Because you can't be both." We reached the athletic dorm. He held the door and went in. I stood outside for a moment. "Figure out which one you want to be." There was a version of my life that had a very clean answer to that question. The version my dad had been building since I was 6 years old, disciplined, controlled, impenetrable, bound for the draft and then the league and then whatever came after the league. That version had no room for a transfer student with a silver ring on her thumb who wrote my name in her notebook margins and said goodbye with my first name and made the library on a Friday night feel like the only place on this campus that was real. And there was the other version. The one that existed in the 5 a.m. ICE sessions when nobody was watching. The one that had turned left outside the humanities building without deciding to. I didn't have language for that version. It didn't have a blueprint. Jens was right. I knew he was right. I'd known it the whole time he was talking. I didn't say that. I went inside. That night I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building settle around me, and I thought about the scout visit in 11 days and my dad's voice on the phone and the face-off percentages. Then I thought about the library. Then I thought about figure out which one you want to be and how the answer was sitting right there at the edge of something I hadn't been willing to reach for yet. I closed my eyes. The fragment of Brody's phone conversation drifted through, a name, a location, partial, unattached to anything. I turned it over once and let it go. I had 11 days until my future arrived to be evaluated. I could figure out the rest after. I didn't know yet how wrong that was. End of Chapter 5. The Seminar. Dakota's POV. The plan was simple. Show up, do the work, get the grade, give him nothing. That was it. That was the entire strategy for the semester project partnership that Professor Aldridge had assigned with what I could only assume was some cosmic sense of humor. Cole Callahan and Dakota Price. 40% of the final grade. Mandatory collaboration logged with timestamps. Fine. I could work with anyone. I'd done group projects with people I liked less than Cole Callahan, and at least with him I knew exactly where I stood. I got to the library first. That was intentional. I wanted my books open and my notes out before he arrived, wanted to already be in the frame of the thing so there was no moment of awkwardness about how we were going to begin. Just, we're here, we're working, let's work. He came in at exactly the time he'd said. Jacket, no bag, just a laptop under one arm. He pulled out the chair across from me without asking, sat down, opened the laptop. Which case study, he said. The Ridgway one. I pushed the textbook across the table. I've already flagged the relevant pages. He looked at the flags. 3 of them, color-coded. He didn't say anything about that. He opened to the first flag and read. The first 20 minutes were functional. Quiet and clinical, both of us reading and making notes and not talking unless it was about the material. That was what I wanted. That was the shape I needed this to have, transactional, bounded, nothing that could be mistaken for anything else. Then he said, Ridgway's not the interesting case here. I looked up. It's the assigned case. I know what it is. He turned the book around and pointed to the footnote on page 4, a reference to a connected case, smaller, less documented, involving a college athletic program 3 states over. This one runs parallel, but the institutional response was completely different. Same ethical breach, opposite outcome. If we write the project on Ridgway without pulling this in, we're writing half an argument. I looked at the footnote. I'd seen it and decided it was background noise. He wasn't wrong. I didn't want him to not be wrong. I wanted him to show up late or be useless or spend the session looking at his phone. I wanted to confirm what I already thought I knew about him, that the ice and the captaincy and the scout reports were all he was, and under that he was exactly what he'd looked like in the dining hall. Someone who ran on power because power was easy and thinking was harder. Pull it up, I said. He did. We read it in parallel, him on his laptop, me leaning over to see the screen because I'd left my own laptop in the room. He angled it toward me without being asked. I noted that. I filed it away somewhere I didn't examine. The institutional response here is liability-driven, he said. It's not ethics, it's legal exposure. They did the right thing for the wrong reason. Does the reason change the outcome? It changes whether it happens again. He leaned back. If you act because you're afraid of getting caught, you act differently when you think you won't. I looked at him. He was looking at the screen. His jaw had that particular set to it that I'd already learned meant he was thinking and not performing, less rigid than his public face, more focused. Like something behind his eyes had stopped managing the surface and gone straight to the work. That's the argument, I said. I know. The project is going to be better than I thought it would be. He glanced over at me. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, more like the edge of one, the shape that a smile would leave if it passed through quickly and didn't stay. You thought it was going to be bad. I thought you were going to be useless. I'm aware of what you thought. We held eye contact for about 2 seconds. Then I looked back at the textbook. We worked for another 40 minutes. It was, I don't have a comfortable word for it. It was good. Sharp and direct, both of us following the thread of the argument wherever it went, no ego about whose idea was whose. At one point we disagreed about the scope of the conclusion and we went back and forth on it for 10 minutes and neither of us backed down until we found the version that was actually correct, and the version that was actually correct was different from both of our starting positions. I forgot, for about 40 minutes, to be careful. Then his phone lit up on the table between us. He glanced at it. And he smiled, not the edge of one this time, the real thing. Cold and satisfied and aimed at whatever he was reading. The face I'd seen across the dining hall. The face that looked like it had just gotten exactly what it ordered. Something went flat in my chest. I looked back down at my notes. I wrote a sentence I'd already written. I made myself keep my face neutral and my breathing even. Same time next week, he said, locking his phone. Works for me. I started stacking my books. He left first. I sat there for another minute after he was gone, hands flat on the table, looking at the place where his laptop had been. 40 minutes. That was how long it had taken me to forget. 40 minutes of following an argument with someone who was sharp enough to keep up, and I'd let my guard drop like it hadn't taken me months to build back up. I walked home in the cold. Mara was out. I dropped my bag and went to the whiteboard on the back of the door, the one I used for weekly schedules, exam countdowns, library hours. I was going to write tomorrow's work block on it. Someone had already written something on it. 3 words, thick black marker, across the middle of the board. Go home transfer. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The marker smell was still in the air, recent, maybe an hour old. Someone had been in our room. Our locked room. I got the cleaning spray from under the sink and a paper towel and I scrubbed it off. It took 4 passes. I did it slowly, the whole time thinking about the smile on Cole Callahan's face when he looked at his phone. Cold and satisfied. Aimed at whatever he was reading. The board came clean. I threw away the paper towel. I washed my hands. I turned off the light and got into bed. I lay there in the dark and I did not let myself feel the part that was scared. I found it, identified it, and I pressed it down hard under everything else, under the cold anger, under the careful documentation in my phone, under the circled name in my notebook, under the version of me that had already been through the worst of this and walked out the other side. I pressed it all the way down. And then I closed my eyes and I went to sleep. End of Chapter 6. Static. Cole's POV. I found out about the whiteboard on a Friday morning and I felt something I didn't have a clean word for. Not guilt. I want to be precise about that because I was precise about it at the time, turning it over, trying to identify it correctly. It wasn't guilt. It was something more like interference. Static on a frequency I was trying to keep clear. Brody had gone into her room, into a locked room that he'd gotten a key for through someone in housing who owed him a favor, and he'd written 3 words on her whiteboard, and he'd done it without telling me. That was the part that sat wrong. He came to practice Friday morning already moving like someone who'd handled something, that particular looseness in his shoulders that meant he was satisfied with himself. I waited until we were alone in the equipment room after drills. The whiteboard, I said. He looked up from his bag. She needs to know. I didn't ask you to do it. I know, but... Brody. I kept my voice flat. I've learned that flat lands harder than loud, loud gives people something to push back against. Flat just sits there. Nothing happens without me knowing first. Not a text, not a note, not a word to her face. You run it through me. He was quiet for a second. He had the look he gets when he's deciding whether to push it, a tightening around his eyes that I'd known for 2 years and had learned to read exactly. He decided not to. Fine, he said. She's mine to handle. He nodded. Zipped his bag. Left. I stood in the equipment room for a moment after he was gone. The words had come out of me clean and certain the way things do when you've decided them, and they were true in the way I meant them. She was a problem I'd identified, and problems I identified stayed mine to manage. That was straightforward. It didn't entirely feel straightforward. I put my gear away and went to the ice. The first home game of the season was the following Friday. Frost Academy Blades versus the Caldwell Bears, our first conference game, the one that set the tone for everything that came after. I'd been running plays in my head for 2 weeks. The line combinations, the defensive pairings, where Caldwell was weak on the left side, the way their goalie dropped half a second slow on low shots. I was ready. I was always ready. That was the one thing, maybe the only thing, I never had to manufacture. The rink filled up fast. Frost ran on hockey the way some schools ran on football. It was the center of gravity for the whole campus, the thing that organized the social calendar, the reason half the student body had opinions about zone defense. I could hear the crowd from the locker room. That sound always did something specific to me, like a wire pulled tight inside my chest. Coach Harlan came in at 6:15. He didn't give long pre-game speeches. He gave short, accurate ones. Caldwell is physical and they're going to try to get in your heads early. Don't let them buy real estate up there. He looked around the room. Play your game. Not their game. Yours. Then he looked at me. That was it. That was the whole speech. I led the team out. The ice was perfect, freshly cut, bright under the overhead lights, that particular clean smell that I'd never found anywhere else. I did a slow lap while the crowd settled and the announcements ran, and I felt the tightness in my chest even out, the way it always did the moment my blades were on the ice. The game started clean and went physical fast. Caldwell's left defenseman hit Jens hard into the boards in the first minute, legal but pointed, the kind of hit that says this is what tonight is. Jens got up and skated it off. Good. I was everywhere. That sounds like arrogance, but it was just accuracy. I knew where the puck was going before it got there. I'd been doing this long enough that the read was automatic, and when you're running on that kind of instinct the game opens up wide and clean in front of you. I scored on a backhand at 7 minutes. Assisted on Jens's goal at 14. By the end of the first period we were up 2-0 and Caldwell's coach had already burned his first timeout. Between periods I drank water and listened to Harlan and kept my breathing steady. Second period I was on the ice for a delayed penalty and I had 2 seconds with the puck and space opening up on the right and I took the shot on pure instinct, no thought, just the read and the motion, and it went top corner clean and the building came apart. That's the only way I know how to describe it. The crowd sound wasn't loud exactly, it was total. It was everywhere at once, above and below and inside your chest, and for about 4 seconds the only thing that existed in the entire world was that sound and the ice under my skates and my teammates crashing into me. For 4 seconds I was not Marcus Callahan's son running a scout report in my head. I was not the captain performing certainty for 18 guys who needed to believe in something. I was just a person on ice who'd just done the thing he was made to do. 4 seconds. Then the whistle blew and we set back up and I was everything else again. We won 4-1. The crowd stayed loud through the third period. I was aware of it the way I was always aware of the crowd, as context, as pressure, as the thing you performed for. I didn't look at individual faces. I never did during a game. But in the third period, during a stoppage for an icing call, I was skating back toward the bench and I looked up into the stands on the left side, student section, and I saw her. Dakota. She was 2 rows up, middle section, Mara next to her. She had the Frost Academy game program open in her lap and she was pointing at something on the page and saying something to Mara, animated in a way I hadn't seen her be, leaning forward, gesturing at the ice, her face open and lit up in that particular way that means someone has forgotten to manage how they look. She was not watching me. She was watching the game. She had the program out and I could see this from the ice, I have good eyes and she was only 20 yards away, she was reading the lineup and pointing at the ice and tracking the play with her whole body, turning to follow the puck. The referee dropped the puck. I skated hard to the corner. Something about it bothered me for the entire third period and I couldn't place it until we were back in the locker room after the final buzzer, the room loud with the particular good noise of a win. I sat at my stall and turned my stick over in my hands and tried to identify it the way I'd tried to identify the whiteboard feeling, carefully, without letting it mean too much. She was in the stands. She'd come to the game. But she hadn't been watching me, she'd been watching the puck. She'd been interested in the actual game, not in the fact that I was in it. I was aware of her in that building for a full period and she was not aware of me at all. I turned my stick over one more time. That was the thing about targeted people, they were always watching for you. That was how it worked. You took up space in their attention whether they wanted it or not. It was a kind of power, and I'd understood how to use it since I was 15 years old. She wasn't watching. I put the stick down. The pranks weren't working. That was the rational conclusion. I'd run 2 of them and her behavior had not changed at all. She'd come to the game. She was reading the program. She was interested. The objective of making her feel unwelcome had clearly not been met, so the logical move was to step back, reassess, try something else or nothing at all. That was the reason I decided to pull back. That was definitely the reason. I told Brody the next morning, casual, between drills. Leave it alone for now. She's not rattled. Different approach. Brody looked at me. Or keep the pressure on. I said leave it. He left it. I told myself it was strategy. I told myself it was because the season had started and I needed my head in one place. I told myself I'd reassess in a week, 2 weeks, whenever I had bandwidth. I didn't reassess. The reason for that was buried so deep I couldn't have found it then with both hands and a flashlight. End of Chapter 17. Ask him. Dakota's POV. I waited 4 days. Not because I was afraid to ask, I've never been afraid to ask the things that needed asking. I waited because I wanted to be steady when I did it. I wanted to ask the question from level ground, not from the charged-up post-game place I'd been in when the text arrived, not from the middle of the night with my phone lit up and my chest already doing things it wasn't supposed to do. I waited until Tuesday. Library. 7 p.m. I got there first, the way I always did. He came in at 7:03 with 2 coffees and sat down across from me and put mine in front of me and opened his laptop. No seminar project. No structured reason to be here. Just the thing we'd settled into over the last 2 weeks, him showing up, me being here, both of us pretending that was a normal and explained thing. I let him get settled. I let him open whatever he was reading. I picked up my coffee and held it in both hands and looked at him. I need to ask you something, I said. He looked up. His face did the thing, the slight shift, the attention sharpening. Okay, he said. Lake Morse. Everything in his expression went still. Not blank, still. There was a difference. Blank was the performance face, the managed surface. This was something underneath the performance going very quiet. Like something had been hit and the hit had landed deep. He didn't say anything for a moment. I watched his jaw, the way his hands went flat on the table. Where did you hear that? He said. I took out my phone. Pulled up the screenshot. Turned it toward him. He read it. Once, twice. His jaw was tight, not angry tight, something older than anger, something with more wear on it. His eyes came up to mine. When did you get this? Saturday night. After the game. Brody ran it, he said. I wasn't in the room when it happened. That's true, I want that to be accurate. But I was in the house and I knew something was wrong and I didn't go in. Something moved in his face, not guilt performing itself, something quieter and harder to look at. Something that had been sitting with him for a long time and had never fully resolved. A week later I filed an anonymous report with Student Affairs. I looked at him. Anonymous, I said. Yes. Why anonymous? He was quiet for a second. Because I was a freshman and Brody was a sophomore and I'd been at this school for 8 weeks and I didn't know what filing with my name on it would do to me. He said it flat, no decoration. That's the real reason. I've told myself other reasons over the years. That's the real one. I kept looking at him. He didn't look away. He was giving me the accurate version. I could feel the difference between that and a managed version, and this didn't have the texture of management. The school handled it quietly, he said. The student left at semester's end. Brody got spoken to. The last sentence came out with a particular flatness, the kind that meant he'd said it to himself enough times that it had worn smooth. Brody found out I was the one who reported it. We've had an understanding since sophomore year. He doesn't use what he knows about me. I don't use what I know about him. What do you know about him? He looked at me steadily. More than I should. The library was quiet around us. Somewhere in the stacks the shelving cart moved, the soft sound of books finding their places. I looked at this person across the table, the one who'd had my notes stamped and pinned to a bulletin board, who'd agreed to paper skates on my door, who'd also sat across from me in this same library for weeks and followed an argument wherever it honestly went and brought the right coffee without making it a thing. Both true. Both real. Both him. Why are you telling me this? I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then, because you asked. And because, he stopped. Started again. Because you showed me the text instead of just deciding what it meant. You could have decided. He paused. Most people decide. I turned my coffee cup in my hands. Around once. Then again. I transferred from Haverton, I said. He nodded. He knew that, it was in the campus directory. There was a group of guys there. I kept my eyes on the coffee cup. Not because I couldn't look at him, but because this was easier to say to a middle distance than to a face. It started small. The same way things started here, actually, someone deciding I was a problem, someone deciding the solution was pressure. I breathed. It got bad. Bad enough that I left. I packed my room in 2 days and went home and spent 3 weeks figuring out who I was on the other side of it. The library was quiet. I came here because it was far enough away, I said. And because the scholarship fit. And because I thought I was done with it. I finally looked up at him. I wasn't expecting to walk into a dining hall and have it start again. His face had done something I hadn't seen it do before. The stillness was different, not managed, not performing anything. He was just looking at me with something in his expression that was uncomplicated and clear and a little like pain. I know, he said. 2 words. The same ones he used when he was being accurate instead of performing. I'd learned to hear the difference. I know that's not enough, he said. I know it doesn't, he stopped. I know. We sat with that for a moment. Outside the library windows the campus had gone dark. The path lights were on, small yellow circles in the black, and the first snow of the year had started at some point without either of us noticing, thin and quiet, settling on the window ledges. I want some air, I said. He stood up when I did. We left our bags at the table, both of us deciding that without discussing it, the bags as an implicit agreement to come back, and went out. The steps of the Humanities building were cold and wet from the snow. We sat anyway, side by side, a few inches between us, both looking out at the path and the snow coming down in the lamplight. Neither of us talked for a while. I was aware of his shoulder, almost against mine. The specific warmth of a person near you in the cold. I didn't move closer. I didn't move away. The anonymous report, I said, eventually. Do you think it would have been different if you'd put your name on it? He was quiet for a moment. I think about that. Another pause. I don't know. Maybe. The school wanted it quiet either way. But maybe if there was a name it was harder to keep quiet. He turned the thought over the way he turned arguments over, honestly, following it where it went rather than where he wanted it to go. I was scared. That's the part one come back to. I was scared and I made the safer choice and someone else paid for it. I looked at the snow on the path. I was scared too, I said. At Haverton. I made the same choice and then I left instead of staying to fight it, and I've thought about that every day since. I paused. I'm still not sure I was wrong. I'm not sure I had enough left to fight with. He didn't say you weren't wrong or you did the right thing, the things people say when they want you to feel better faster than the feeling actually resolves. He just sat there next to me and let it be what it was. I looked at the side of his face. The snow in his hair, fine and white. The scar above his eyebrow catching the lamplight. I looked back at the path. Our shoulders were touching. At some point, without either of us deciding it, the few inches between us had closed. I felt the solid press of his shoulder against mine through both our coats and I didn't move away and neither did he and we sat there in the cold on the wet steps with the snow coming down and neither of us said a word about it. There was no name yet for what this was. but it was real. That much I knew. It was the realest thing that had happened to me since I'd arrived at Frost Academy, and that was either the best news I'd gotten in a long time or the most dangerous. Sitting there with his shoulder against mine, I was too tired to figure out which. End of Chapter 18. All is lost. Cole's POV. It was a charger. That's the thing I keep coming back to, the complete ordinariness of it. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I needed a charger because mine had shorted out before the afternoon skate, and Brody's room was closer than the equipment room, and his door was unlocked because it was always unlocked, because Brody moved through the world like someone who'd never once considered that anything in it might be used against him. I knocked. No answer. I went in. His desk was the usual chaos: tape, a water bottle, 2 textbooks that hadn't been opened in weeks, a practice schedule, his phone face down. I opened the top drawer looking for the charger. Found tape. Found a broken earbud. Found a folded receipt. The folder was in the second drawer. I almost missed it. It was tucked under a legal pad, dark blue, the kind of folder you'd get from the campus bookstore. I wouldn't have looked twice at it, wouldn't have touched it, except that it wasn't fully closed, and the top edge of a paper was sticking out, and on that paper, in printed text, was a name I recognized. I stood there for a second. Then I pulled the folder out. I don't know how long I stood at Brody's desk. Long enough that the afternoon light through the window shifted. Long enough that my hands went from normal to something else, a specific unsteadiness that I'd felt maybe twice in my life before, the kind that isn't fear and isn't anger and is actually much worse than either because it doesn't have a clean shape you can push back against. The folder had 6 pages in it. Screenshots. 3 of them, a social media profile, a comment thread, a photo from what looked like a group event. A printed document, partially redacted, with a header I recognized as an institutional complaint form, the kind used by college student affairs offices. 2 handwritten notes on lined paper, Brody's handwriting, abbreviated, shorthand I had to work out. I worked it out. The complaint form was from Haverton State. Filed approximately 20 months ago. The name of the complainant was redacted, a solid black bar across the line, but the name of the respondent was not, because this wasn't the official copy. This was a copy that had been obtained through a channel that wouldn't have given Brody an official copy. Brody's name. Printed clearly. In a box labeled respondent. The incident summary was partially visible under the redaction. Summer hockey camp. A specific date in July. A dormitory. The language used in the summary was the language those forms always used: careful, clinical, designed to describe something that had no clinical version while staying on the right side of institutional liability. I knew what the language meant. I'd read a version of this before, freshman year, when I'd filed my own report and then spent 3 weeks wondering what happened to it. I looked at the screenshots. The social media profile was hers. Dakota's. A version from 2 years ago, a different school, different photo, same face, same sharp line of her jaw. The comment thread was from a public campus forum at Haverton, anonymous, the kind of thing that got posted and deleted fast. Someone had screenshotted it before it came down. The comment thread was about the complaint. About her. The language in it was the language that gets used when a group of people have decided someone is a problem and have decided that the solution is making sure everyone knows she's the problem. The handwritten notes were the last thing I read. Brody's abbreviations took me a minute. When I understood them, I went still in a way that was different from the stillness the folder had already put in me. He'd known she was coming here before she arrived. Not long before, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Someone at Haverton, someone in the chain that had quietly buried the complaint, had passed the information. Transfer application, destination school, scholarship. And Brody had known. And Brody had come to me in the second week of October and said, let's make her feel less welcome, and I had said fine. I put the folder down on the desk. I picked it back up. I put it down again. My hands were shaking. I looked at them like they belonged to someone else, both of them, flat on the desk on either side of the folder, the knuckles white from how hard I was pressing down. I was pressing down because if I didn't press down I was going to put my fist through something, and putting my fist through something wasn't going to fix the thing that needed fixing, and there was no version of this that got fixed by me losing control of myself in Brody Walsh's room. I breathed. The folder was still there. The pages in it were still true. The facts of it were still exactly what they were. Brody had been at Haverton's summer hockey camp. He had done something to a girl. She had filed a complaint. The complaint had been buried. The girl had left. She had transferred to Frost Academy on a scholarship. Brody had known she was coming. And I, the captain, the person Brody came to with his plans, the person who said fine without thinking and she's mine to handle like that was a sentence a decent person could say, I had been running interference without knowing it. Every prank I'd endorsed. Every moment of social pressure. Every time my name and my position had been behind the message that she didn't belong here and should leave, I had been helping him. Not knowing it, and not knowing it didn't mean a thing. Not to her. The notes were still stamped. The whiteboard was still scrubbed clean. The paper skates had still been on her door. The girl who'd come here to be done with it had walked into a school where the person who hurt her had gotten there first. And I had been the one making sure she felt it. I stood at Brody's desk with my hands pressed flat and I let that sit inside me without trying to manage it, without the performance assembling itself the way it always did when something was too heavy. I let it sit there, the full weight of it, and I breathed through it. I'd never felt like this about anything I'd done on this campus. The pranks hadn't given me this, they'd been a strategy, a power move, a correction of something I'd decided was an imbalance. I hadn't felt them. I felt this. I picked the folder up. I looked at the pages one more time. Then I tucked it under my arm. I walked out of Brody's room and down the hall to mine. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at the folder on the mattress beside me and I thought about the humanities building steps and the snow coming down and her shoulder against mine and the two-word sentences she used when she was being honest and the name circled in her notebook and the way she'd asked me about Lake Morse with her eyes on my face, careful and direct, waiting to see what I actually was. She'd given me the chance to be the honest version. I'd taken it. And I hadn't known, sitting there on those steps with the cold coming in, that the thing she'd needed to be protected from most was something I'd been doing with my own hands. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth. The folder sat on the mattress. I didn't move for a long time. End of Chapter 9. The Rink. Dakota's POV. It was Mara's fault. I want that on record before anything else. I was perfectly fine not going. I had reading to do and a response paper due Friday and exactly 0 reasons to spend a Thursday afternoon watching a hockey practice I hadn't been invited to. Mara is the one who looked up from her legal pad at 2:30 and said, "Practice starts at 3. Public access. Anyone can watch." I'm aware of how public access works. You've been in this room for 6 hours. I've been working for 6 hours. There's a difference. She pulled the highlighter out from behind her ear and pointed it at me. You've read that same page 4 times. I've been watching. She put the highlighter down. Go watch the practice. Understand the world you're in. It'll be useful for the seminar project. The seminar project is about institutional ethics, not Dakota. She looked at me over her glasses. Go. I went. Not because she told me to, I want to be clear about that, but because she was right that I'd read the same page 4 times and the words had stopped meaning anything and I needed air. The rink was a 15-minute walk across campus. I'd passed it a dozen times without going in. From the outside it was a low gray building with the Frost Academy Blades logo painted across the entrance doors in blue and white, the paint bright enough that it had to be recent. Inside, the cold hit immediately, a different kind of cold than the October air outside, sharper and cleaner, the kind that sits in your lungs for a second before you adjust. The practice rink had public seating along one side. Wooden bleachers, 6 rows deep, most of them empty. I sat in the 3rd row near the far end, away from the handful of other students who'd come. I kept my coat on and my bag in my lap and I told myself I was here to observe. Clinically. For context. The team was already on the ice. I found Cole in about 4 seconds, which annoyed me. I hadn't meant to locate him first, I'd meant to watch the practice as a whole, get a sense of how the team functioned, understand the dynamics. But he was impossible not to find. Not because he was loud or showy. The opposite. He was the still point that everything else moved around. When he was in the drill had a center. When he called something to a teammate, and he was quiet even then, no shouting, just words that carried because people were already listening, the formation adjusted before the sentence finished. I'd understood he was good. I'd seen the game, seen the goal, heard the crowd. I'd understood it in the way you understand a fact you've been told, accurately but without weight. This was different. Watching him in practice, no game pressure, no performance for the crowd, this was where the fact got weight. He moved on the ice the way very few people move anywhere, in any discipline, like the medium was made for him specifically, like every adjustment of his body was the right one before he decided it, like he and the ice had an agreement that everything else was working around. Efficient in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. I knew enough about effort to recognize what it looked like when it had been in the body so long it stopped showing. He was doing a drill I didn't know the name of, a tight series of turns at high speed, puck control through a course of cones, the kind of thing that looked like it should be routine and clearly wasn't for anyone except him. Two of his teammates fell out of line trying to match it. Cole came through clean every time. He didn't celebrate. He looped back to the start and went again. Something happened in my chest. I pressed my hands flat against my bag and kept my face completely still, and I named what was happening with the same clinical vocabulary I used for everything I didn't want to be feeling. Admiration. Physical response to demonstrated skill. Normal human reaction to watching someone do something exceptionally well. That was all it was. I believed that for about 45 more seconds, and then he did something at the far end of the ice that I didn't have the hockey vocabulary to name, a turn and a pass executed simultaneously that found a teammate in motion 20 feet away and landed perfectly, and one of the other students 2 rows behind me said "oh damn" quietly under their breath, and I felt my chest do the thing again, sharper this time. I did not have feelings about Cole Callahan. I was going to continue not having them. The drill ended. The team gathered at center ice around Coach Harlan, who talked for about 2 minutes while they drank water and caught their breath. Cole stood slightly apart from the group, not excluded, just at the edge, watching Harlan with his full attention while everyone else was also watching Mara at least halfway. He held his stick at his side. His chest was moving from the effort, but his face was settled. This was him without the performance. I could see the difference now that I knew to look, in the dining hall, in the seminar, even in the quiet library sessions, there was always a layer of management. A consciousness of how he was landing. On the ice it was gone. He was just a person doing the thing his entire body understood. That scared me more than the management did. I was deciding to leave, I'd made the decision, I was reaching for my bag, when practice ended and the team started coming off the ice. I stood up and turned toward the exit, and someone across the rink called something and I looked up without meaning to. Cole was at the far boards, pulling off his helmet. He looked up at the same moment. Across the full width of the ice, he saw me. I didn't move. He didn't move. It was maybe 4 seconds, the kind of 4 seconds that have a different weight than normal time, thick and still, both of us not looking away. I didn't know what was in my face. I knew what I was trying to keep out of it. Then Brody skated up behind him and said something, leaning in close, his mouth near Cole's ear. Cole's eyes stayed on me for 1 more second. Then something in his face shifted, that cold, deliberate thing, the management sliding back into place, and he said something back to Brody and smirked. Low and private, the two of them sharing whatever it was. I looked away first. I picked up my bag and walked to the exit and pushed through the doors into the cold air and kept walking. I was not going to be angry. There was nothing to be angry about. I'd come of my own choice, I'd seen what I'd come to see, I'd felt something stupid and now I was done feeling it. Easy. Simple. Over. I pressed my fingers against my sternum where my chest was still doing the thing. Easy. Simple. Over. Mara was still on her bed with her legal pad when I got back. She looked at my face and very wisely said nothing. I dropped my bag. I took off my coat. I sat on my bed. She waited. He's good, I said. On the ice. It's different. He's different. I know. It doesn't change anything. I know. I'm just noting it as an observation. Okay. I lay back and looked at the Michigan water stain on the ceiling. Mara. If I'm ever about to do something genuinely stupid, I need you to. I'll tell you. Okay. She went back to her notes. I stayed on my back and breathed and talked myself down from the ledge of whatever that had been at the rink, that 4 seconds of eye contact across the ice, and the thing my chest had done for the entire hour before it. I was almost steady. Then there was a knock at the door. I frowned. Mara frowned. Neither of us was expecting anyone. I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. But the outside of our door, every inch of it, floor to ceiling, was covered. Tiny paper skates, dozens of them, cut from white paper and taped in rows, overlapping, edge to edge. And in the center, printed in large black letters on a single sheet taped directly at eye level. Should have stayed transferred. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. The paper skates were deliberate. Specific. Not just a message, a reference to where I'd just been. Someone had known I was at the rink today. Someone had watched me walk in and used the time I was gone to do this. My hands were at my sides. I was aware of Mara behind me getting off her bed, coming to look. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, Dakota. I know, I said. I started pulling the paper skates down. One at a time, steady, working from the top. Mara got up without a word and started from the other side. We had the door clear in 10 minutes. I photographed it first. I always photographed it first. Then I sat back on my bed and looked at my phone and at the photo of the decorated door, and I thought about Cole Callahan's face across the ice, that 4-second window before Brody leaned in, and I thought about the smirk that came after, and something that had been warm in my chest all afternoon went cold and stayed that way. The paper skates were specific. Personal. Timed. This wasn't random anymore. This was a message from someone who was paying very close attention. End of Chapter 10. The door. Cole's POV. I found out about the door on Friday morning. Not from Brody. He didn't bring it up, which meant either he thought it was too small to mention or he knew I wouldn't like it and was banking on me not finding out. He was wrong on the second count. I found out from Jensen, who'd heard it from someone in the housing block next to hers, who'd seen it in the hallway before it came down. Jens told me at breakfast with his tray in front of him and his coffee cup in both hands and the specific expression he gets when he's delivering information he expects me to react badly to. Even, careful, watching my face. Paper skates on the door, he said. A message in the middle. She'd been at practice the afternoon before. I stopped. She was at practice. I said. Public access, so. I know it's public access. I picked up my coffee. Put it back down. What did the message say? He told me. I sat with that for a moment. The paper skates were Brody, the specificity of it, the timing, the fact that it was tied directly to the practice she'd attended. That was Brody's particular style of cruelty, the kind that wanted you to know you were being watched. That it wasn't random. That someone had their eye on you specifically. I hadn't ordered it. I told Brody the morning after the whiteboard, nothing without me knowing, and he'd done it anyway. While I was on the ice 20 yards away from her, he'd been up in the housing block, taping paper to her door. Something moved through me that I pressed down before it could fully form. She take it down? I said. By the time anyone got a good look, yeah. I nodded. Drank my coffee. Jens looked at me steadily. You didn't know about it. It wasn't quite a question. I didn't answer it. Cole. Drop it. He dropped it. But the way he dropped it, setting it down instead of letting it go, meant it was still on the table between us and we both knew it. She confronted me that same afternoon outside the Humanities building. I'd just come from the training room and I was heading to the library to work on the counterargument section I owed her. I'd finished it, good work I was actually satisfied with, structured the way the argument needed, and she came around the corner and stopped when she saw me and I saw in her face that she'd been looking for me. Her jaw was set. She had her bag over one shoulder and her hands at her sides and she looked at me straight on the way she always did, no flinching, no building up to it. The door, she said. I held her gaze. That's a new level, she said. Using where I'd been. Timing it while I was out. Making sure I knew I was being watched. Her voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear something underneath it, not fear, not weakness, something harder than either. You wanted me to feel it. I said nothing. She watched me for a moment. The silence stretched. She was waiting for a denial, I think, some deflection or dismissal, which was what she'd come to expect from me. When I didn't give one, she tilted her head slightly. Just a fraction. An adjustment. Okay, she said. Like she'd confirmed something. Like my silence was the answer and she'd filed it. She walked past me and into the building. I stood on the path and listened to the door close behind her. I should have told her I didn't do it. That was the clean thing, that was the accurate thing, and some part of me that was becoming uncomfortably loud lately knew that. Knew it clearly. I hadn't ordered the door. I hadn't known about the door until that morning. If she thought I had, that was a misunderstanding I could correct with one sentence. I didn't say the sentence. Because saying the sentence meant explaining why I wouldn't have done it, and I didn't have an explanation that didn't require looking at something I'd been deliberately not looking at for 2 weeks. The reason I hadn't ordered the door was the same reason I'd pulled back after the first game, the same reason her name in the margin of her notebook had rattled me in a way I hadn't been rattled by anything in a long time. And I could not say that reason out loud, not to her, not to anyone, barely even to myself in the quietest part of my own head. So I let her assume. I let her think what she walked away thinking, and I told myself it was because the performance demanded it, because a captain who backs down from anything backs down from everything, because the order of this campus was the order I'd built and I didn't dismantle it for a transfer student who'd been here 6 weeks. I told myself that for about 40 minutes. Then I went to the library and worked on the seminar project because it was due in 2 weeks and we were almost done and I needed to finish this correctly. The project was almost finished. That was the fact I kept coming back to across the next few days, the way you come back to something sore, pressing it to check if it's changed. 2 weeks out. Maybe less. We'd built something genuinely good, better than anything I'd turned in for Aldridge before, better structured, better argued, the kind of work that was satisfying in a way I didn't feel about much outside of the ice. We'd built it together. That was the part one couldn't separate out, the inconvenient detail. It wasn't mine or hers, it was the thing that happened when we were both in the room following the argument wherever it went. In 2 weeks that was over. The forced proximity ended. There was no reason after that for me to be in the same room as Dakota Price. No reason to sit across a library table from her 3 times a week or watch her annotate a case study or hear her say okay, you're right in that flat, accurate way that meant she wasn't giving ground, she was just following the evidence. No reason for any of it. I should have felt relief. I went to the rink at midnight on a Thursday. Alone, the way I went the mornings, the lights humming on slowly while I laced up. I pushed off the boards and skated and I did not think about the seminar project or the door or the reason I hadn't corrected her assumption in front of the humanities building. I skated until my legs burned and my lungs ached and there was nothing left in my head except the motion and the cold and the sound of the blades. It took longer than usual to get there. When I finally stopped, breathing hard at center ice, I stood still for a moment and looked at the boards and thought about the fact that in 2 weeks the forced proximity ended and I would have no reason to keep seeing her. I stood there with that for a long time. Then I laced my skates tighter and kept going. End of Chapter 11. Fault Lines. Dakota's POV. I started losing my footing on a Tuesday. Not because of anything that happened. That was the specific, uncomfortable truth of it, nothing happened on that Tuesday. Cole showed up to the library session on time. He put the black coffee in front of me. We worked through the final section of the project for 2 hours and the work was good and sharp and we disagreed twice and resolved it both times cleanly. He said okay, you're right once and I said it back once and at the end we had a conclusion that was solid enough that I read it over twice just to make sure it held. Nothing happened. But when I walked back to the dorm in the dark, I noticed that I was already thinking about Thursday. I stopped in the middle of the path. A girl behind me said sorry and went around me and I stood there for a second in the cold with my bag on my shoulder and my breath clouding in the air and I made myself be honest about what I was actually thinking. Not about the project. Not about the enforcement section or the Mercer precedent. About Thursday. About sitting across a table from him for 2 hours. About the way he leaned forward when he was tracking an argument, the way the scar over his eyebrow caught the library light from the left. I had not come to Frost Academy to do this. I walked the rest of the way back fast, like I could outpace what I'd just noticed. Mara was at her desk when I came in. She looked at me once and said, "What happened?" "Nothing. That face is not nothing." I dropped my bag and sat on my bed and looked at the Michigan water stain and tried to decide how honest to be. With Mara I was usually fairly honest. She was the kind of person who could handle accuracy, who actually preferred it. But there was a version of this truth that I hadn't let myself say out loud yet because saying it out loud made it real in a different way. "I think I'm in trouble," I said. Mara put her highlighter down. She didn't say anything. She was waiting to see if I meant the pranks, the door, the escalating messages, all the documented, photographed, legitimate kind of trouble. She was waiting to see if that was what I meant. I looked at her. She closed her legal pad. "Oh," she said. "I'm not," I stopped. Started again. "I'm not saying I like him. I'm saying I'm starting to notice things about him that I don't want to notice." I pressed my thumb against my palm. "It's not real. It's proximity. It's the project. We've been in the same room 9 times in 2 weeks and he's..." I stopped again. "Sharp," Mara said. "Not a question. Sharper than he should be." I pulled my knees up. "And he brought the right coffee on Tuesday." Mara went very still. I didn't say anything about it. I just drank it. But it was right, the milk, the amount, exactly how I take it. And he didn't mention it and I didn't mention it and we just worked. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead. "That's such a small thing. It's a nothing thing. I'm aware that it's a nothing thing. Dakota. I know. He decorated your door with paper skates 5 days ago. I know. He had your study notes stamped with the word transfer and pinned to a bulletin board. I know what he did, Mara." My voice came out harder than I meant it to. I breathed. "I know exactly what he did. That's the problem. I know what he did and I know what he's like in a library at 7 p.m. when nobody's watching, and those two things are living in the same space in my head and I can't sort them into separate categories anymore." She looked at me for a long moment. There was something careful in her face, the look she got when she was about to say something that she knew I didn't want to hear but that I actually needed. "Be careful," she said. That was all. Simple, direct, no drama. "I know. I mean it. The project ends in 2 weeks. Let it end." I nodded. She picked her legal pad back up. I stayed on my bed for a while and looked at the water stain and breathed and talked myself back to level. By the time I got up to make tea I was mostly steady. Not entirely. But mostly. I ran into Brody Walsh on Thursday. It wasn't planned. I was cutting through the parking structure on the way back from the campus bookstore. It was faster than going around and I was running late for a meeting, and he was coming the other direction with his hands in his jacket pockets and no one else in the structure. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. Something in my body went alert in a way it didn't with Cole, a different register, lower and less specific, the kind of response that lives in your stomach. Brody was physically bigger and he moved through space like someone who assumed it belonged to him, and when Cole wasn't around there was no management in his face at all. Just him. I kept walking. Straight line, steady pace. He matched it. We were going to pass each other in about 10 feet. "How's the project going?" he said. I looked at him. I didn't stop walking. "Fine. Cole's a good partner when he wants to be." He said Cole's name with something in it, a weight or a shade, I couldn't land on exactly what. "He doesn't usually want to be." "Okay. You should feel special." He smiled. It didn't reach anything above his mouth. He doesn't give most people that much time. I was almost past him. 4 more steps. Then again, he said, casual, like it was an afterthought, like it had just occurred to him, "You're used to getting attention from guys you shouldn't. Aren't you?" I stopped. The parking structure was quiet. One fluorescent light above us buzzing slightly, the cold rising up from the concrete, no other sound. I turned and looked at him. His face was still easy. Still wearing the smile. But his eyes were doing something different, watchful, measuring, waiting to see what the words had hit. "What did you say?" I said. He shrugged. Just making conversation. I looked at him for 3 more seconds. My pulse was in my ears. I kept my face completely still. I'd had practice at that, more practice than anyone should need, and I looked at him and he looked back at me and neither of us said anything else. Then I turned and walked out of the structure. I kept my pace even until I was clear of the building, and then I turned the first corner I reached and stopped and put my back against the wall and breathed. You're used to getting attention from guys you shouldn't. It was vague. Deniable. The kind of thing you could explain away. I just meant you and Cole, it was a joke, you're too sensitive. I knew that language. I'd heard it before. I knew exactly what it was designed to do, land just close enough to make you doubt yourself, then pull back to safe ground before you could call it what it was. But it was also possible that it was nothing. A random comment. Bad taste, no meaning, no knowledge of anything. I pressed my shoulders back against the wall. It was probably nothing. He didn't know anything. How would he know anything? This was a different school, different state, a year and a half ago. I pushed off the wall and started walking. It was probably nothing. I didn't believe that. But I needed to, for right now, today, until I could think it through clearly, I needed to hold the probably in place and not let it collapse into what my body was already telling me, that flat cold certainty in my gut that I'd learned not to argue with. I walked back to the dorm. I sat at my desk. I opened my notebook to the page with Cole Callahan's name in the margin, circled in clean, deliberate ink. I looked at it for a long time. Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote Brody Walsh's name at the top. I didn't circle it. Not yet. End of. Chapter 12. The seminar ends. Cole's POV. Aldridge handed the projects back on a Wednesday. He did it at the end of seminar, after an hour of case discussion that I'd been present for in body and about 60% in mind. The other 40% had been on Saturday's game, on the face-off numbers, on the scout report my dad had forwarded Sunday night with 3 words underneath at this time, watch your positioning, which was more than he usually sent and somehow felt like less. Aldridge moved through the room setting papers face down on desks. I watched him cross toward the back row and he put ours in front of me without pausing, already moving to the next pair. I flipped it over. 94. And underneath the grade, in Aldridge's tight, slanted handwriting, best in the class. The enforcement design argument is exactly the kind of original thinking this seminar is designed to produce. Well done. I read it twice. I looked at the grade. I looked at the comment. 94 was the highest grade I'd received at Frost Academy for anything that wasn't a hockey performance metric. I'd gotten good grades before, I worked for them, not because anyone expected it but because I didn't do things halfway, but I'd never gotten a grade that came with best in the class written underneath it in a professor's handwriting. I looked at the empty seat in front of me. Dakota had left the seminar early, a conflict she'd mentioned Tuesday, something about a rescheduled meeting with the financial aid office. I'd told her I'd pick up the paper. I had a picture of it on my phone before I'd consciously decided to take one. She was outside the humanities building when I came out. Sitting on the steps with her bag in her lap and her coat buttoned to the top, waiting. She stood when she saw me and there was something in her face I hadn't seen before, a specific, barely there version of wanting to know that she wasn't quite covering. I handed her the paper without saying anything. She flipped it over. Read the grade, then the comment. Something moved through her face, not a smile exactly, something quieter and more private than a smile. The kind of thing that happens before a person decides whether to let the feeling be visible. She let it be visible. Just for a second. 94, she said. Best in the class. I know what it says. But there was no edge in it. She looked at the paper again and then looked up at me. Good. Yeah. She tucked the paper into her bag. I had my hands in my jacket pockets and we were standing at the top of the steps with people moving around us on the way out of the building and neither of us said anything for a moment. That moment stretched. The project was done. The meetings were done. There was no Tuesday, no Thursday, no Saturday morning at the library table with the wrong coffee and the enforcement design argument and the specific quality of working alongside someone who could keep up. It was done and there was no reason for either of us to be standing here and we both knew it. She looked at the path. At the campus spread out below the steps in the gray October light. Then she looked back at me. "You're not entirely terrible at academics," she said. Something moved in my chest. I kept my face level. "You're not entirely terrible to work with." The edge of her mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, less than that, more controlled. But it was there. "See you around, Callahan," she said. She went down the steps and turned left toward the housing block. I stood at the top of the steps and watched her go. The distance between us got longer and I did not move. Someone came out of the building behind me and said something I didn't catch and went around me, and still I stood there with my hands in my pockets. She turned the corner. Gone. I'd been captain for 2 years. Before that I'd been the guy people assumed would be captain for 2 more years. I'd made decisions on the ice that affected 18 guys and made decisions off it that affected the entire social structure of this campus, and I'd made all of them without hesitating because hesitation was a crack and cracks spread. The project was over. That was clean. That was done. The logical, correct, reasonable thing was to let it be over and redirect my attention to the things that actually mattered: the scout visit, the season record, the face-off percentage, the game on Saturday. I went down the steps and turned left. I didn't examine the decision. That's important to understand. I didn't sit with it or talk myself into it or construct a justification. I just turned left and started walking, and by the time I'd registered what I was doing I was already halfway to the library. I was not going to torment her. That wasn't what this was. I knew what this was and I wasn't going to name it, not yet, but I knew what it wasn't. I was just not done. That was all I had. I was not done, and I had never in my life made a choice based on something that thin, and I made it anyway, and for the entire walk to the library I kept waiting for the part of me that managed everything to step in and correct it. That part stayed quiet. I pushed through the library door. End of Chapter 13. Choosing. Dakota's POV. He showed up on a Friday. No project. No seminar. No reason I could identify. He wasn't assigned to the library, wasn't meeting anyone I could see, wasn't in the section where most of the athletic students worked. He came through the main entrance at 6:15 and walked directly to the table where I was sitting and pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. He put a coffee in front of me. Then he opened the book he'd brought and started reading. I stared at him for a full 5 seconds. He didn't look up. I looked at the coffee. I looked at him. I looked back at my own work, a political theory reading I'd been halfway through when he sat down. I found my place on the page. We sat there. The library was quiet, the Friday evening kind of quiet where most people had already left for whatever Friday evening in college was supposed to involve, and the few who were still here were deep in their own work. The overhead lights were warm and low. Somewhere in the stack someone was shelving books, the soft thud of spines against wood coming every few minutes. I read 3 pages. He read. I turned a page. He turned a page. At some point I reached for the coffee without deciding to and took a drink. It was right. The milk, the amount, pale and slightly sweet, exactly how I took it. I set the cup down and looked at it for a second and then looked at the top of his head, bent over his book. I looked back at my page. I read 2 more pages and retained approximately nothing from either of them. The thing about silence with Cole Callahan was that it had a different texture than silence with other people. Most people filled quiet because they were uncomfortable in it. He didn't fill it and he wasn't uncomfortable, he just existed in it, present and self-contained, and the weight of that was somehow louder than talking. I was aware of him across the table the way you're aware of something that generates heat, not looking directly, but knowing it's there, feeling the distance between you in a specific physical way. I turned another page. He shifted slightly, resettling in the chair, and I caught his hand on the edge of my peripheral vision, the way he held the book, his grip on the spine. He held a book the same way he held his stick. I'd noticed that at the library sessions. Like he was about to do something with it rather than just reading from it. Like everything he held was something he was prepared to use. I looked at the page. I'd read this paragraph 3 times. I could not have told anyone what was in it. At 7 o'clock I closed my books. I stacked them, capped my pen, tucked my notebook into my bag. The whole process took about 2 minutes. He kept reading. I stood up and put my coat on and picked up my bag. I looked at him. At the top of his head, the dark hair, the line of the scar above his brow that was visible when he was looking down. "You could just talk to me, you know," I said. He looked up. His eyes met mine directly, the way they always did, no preamble, no adjustment, just contact. "I am talking to you." I held it for a second. "Goodbye, Cole." I turned and walked toward the exit. The door was 15 steps away. I counted them. I made it all the way to 12 before I felt it, the thing I'd been holding back the entire 40 minutes, and I pressed my fingers over my mouth to stop it. I pushed through the door into the cold hallway. The smile got out anyway. I stood in the hallway for 3 seconds with my fingers against my lips and my bag on my shoulder and the cold pressing in from the stairwell, and I let it happen because there was nobody to see it and I was so tired of managing every single thing. 3 seconds. Then I took my hand down and kept walking. I lay awake for a long time that night. Mara was asleep by 11, her breathing deep and even, the legal pad on her nightstand exactly parallel to the edge like she'd placed it deliberately even half asleep. The room was dark. I was on my back looking at the Michigan water stain I couldn't see in the dark. I'd told myself I would not do this. I'd told myself multiple times, clearly, in direct language, that this was proximity and habit and the particular trap of spending extended time with someone intelligent and letting that mean more than it did. I'd told myself. I'd believed it. I didn't believe it now. He came to the library because he wanted to be there. Not for a grade. Not for a project. Just to sit across from me in the quiet and read, and he'd brought the right coffee this time and hadn't said a word about it, and when I'd said goodbye and used his name, not Callahan, the name itself, Cole, something in his face had shifted in a way that I'd been cataloging since I walked out the door. He held a pencil like he was about to snap it. I'd noticed that at every session and never said it. He tapped the eraser end twice when he was thinking and then went still when he'd reached a conclusion. The scar over his right eyebrow was old enough to be silver white in good light. He'd looked at the 94 on our paper and his jaw had done the thing, not tight, looser than tight, the particular set that meant something had landed and he was letting it. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth in the dark. I knew what this was. I knew exactly what this was. I'd known it was coming since the day he said okay, you're right and went back to the argument without making the concession into something. Maybe before that. Maybe since the rink, since the 4 seconds across the ice before Brody leaned in. I knew what it was. I also knew who he was. The stamped notes. The whiteboard. The paper skates on my door and the message in the center. The smirk he'd shared with Brody across the rink while I stood in the bleachers trying to breathe. I pressed my hand harder. Both of those things were true at the same time and I didn't know what to do with that except lie in the dark and hold them both and wait for one of them to get heavier than the other. I fell asleep eventually. When I woke up in the morning the question was still there, sitting on my chest, patient as anything. I got up and made tea and didn't answer it. End of Chapter 15. Night Game. Dakota's POV. The ticket appeared under our door on a Friday morning. No envelope. No note. Just a game ticket, face up on the floor, slid through the gap like someone had walked past and let it go without breaking stride. I picked it up. Student section, row 4, center ice. Saturday night, Frost Academy vs. Harwick, the rivalry game, the one the entire campus had been building toward for 2 weeks like it was a religious event. I turned it over. Nothing on the back. Mara looked at it from her bed. Where did that come from? Floor. Someone put it there. Clearly. She looked at me with the expression she reserved for things she'd already figured out that she was waiting for me to figure out too. I put the ticket on my desk and went back to my reading. By Saturday afternoon I'd looked at it 4 more times. I told myself I was going because I'd been to one game already, because I understood the sport better now, because it was the biggest game of the season and there was a legitimate academic argument for understanding the cultural context of the institution I was studying ethics within. I told myself all of that. It was even partially true. I put on my coat and went. The rink was a different thing on rivalry night. The first game I'd attended had been loud. This was something past loud, it was a physical presence, the noise, sitting in your chest before you'd even found your seat. Every row was full. The student section was standing before the teams came out. Someone had painted their face in Blades blue 2 rows ahead of me and was leading a chant I didn't know the words to and didn't need to. I found my seat. Row 4, center ice, exactly where the ticket said. The seat next to me was empty. I didn't look for who had put the ticket under my door. I kept my eyes on the ice and my hands around the coffee I'd brought from the campus cart outside. The teams came out and the building came apart. I found Cole in 4 seconds again. I'd stopped being annoyed at myself for that, it was just accurate, like finding the center of gravity in a room, automatic and precise. He came out last, the way the captain always did, and the section above the student seat started something loud and rhythmic the moment he hit the ice. He didn't acknowledge it. He did a lap, head down, focused, and I watched his face from 40 feet away and saw the same thing I'd seen at practice, the armor gone, everything stripped back to just the work. The game started clean and went brutal inside the first 5 minutes. Harwick was physical in a way the first team I'd watched hadn't been, targeted, deliberate, the kind of physical that was sending a message as much as playing hockey. Their defenseman hit Jens into the boards twice in the first period, hard enough that the second time I heard the impact from row 4. Jens got up both times. The third time he saw it coming and went around it and put the puck in the net on the same shift and the building erupted. Cole assisted on it. I watched the whole sequence, the read, the pass, the timing, and I thought about what he'd said in the seminar about institutional response being either liability-driven or ethics-driven, and how you could tell the difference by watching what happened when nobody was watching. On the ice, Cole was ethics-driven. He made the right play because it was the right play. Every time. Whether it made him look good or not. I was reading too much into a hockey game. I knew that. I kept watching. The second period was where Cole became something else. Harwick had gotten aggressive with him specifically, 2 hits that were legal and 1 that wasn't, which got a penalty and a power play that Cole converted with a shot so clean it was almost quiet, top corner, the goalie not even moving the right direction. The building noise was total for about 10 seconds. Cole turned from the net and there was something in his face in the moment before his teammates reached him, not triumph, not performance, something private and satisfied and completely his. I looked down at my coffee. My chest was doing the thing. I'd stopped pretending I didn't know what the thing was. Frost won 5-2. The third period was controlled, Cole ran the clock, managed the play, made sure nothing came undone in the last 10 minutes the way things can come undone when a team gets comfortable too early. When the final buzzer went the noise was something I felt in my back teeth. I was heading out through the post-game crowd when someone touched my elbow. Not grabbed. Just a touch, light and deliberate, and I turned around already knowing. Cole had gotten out of the locker room fast, hair still damp, jacket over his gear, moving through the crowd with the kind of ease that came from everyone automatically making space. He stopped when I turned. We were close enough that I had to look up slightly. The hallway outside the locker rooms was chaos. Families, students, staff, everyone talking at once, music from somewhere above us, people pushing through in both directions. The noise was a wall. He leaned in. Not far. Just enough to close the gap between the noise and my ear, his mouth near my temple, his voice lower than I'd heard it. "You came," he said. I turned my head slightly. Which put my face close to his. Which was a fact I registered and did not move away from. "Someone left me a ticket," I said. Something moved in his expression. The edge of the thing he always kept back. "How'd you find your seat?" "It was on the ticket." His mouth was almost at the corner of mine and I was not moving back and he was not moving back and the hallway noise had gone to a specific kind of distant, the kind where you're still aware of it but it's on the other side of something. Dakota. The door behind him blew open. Brody came through it at full post-win momentum, loud, moving fast, arm already going around Cole's shoulders before he'd fully registered who else was there. 5-2, man, did you see that third period? We shut them completely. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, quick and complicated. Then the grin came back, wider than before. Transfer. Didn't know you were a hockey fan. I took a step back. The distance between me and Cole reset to something normal and the hallway noise came back in full and Cole's face had done the thing, the management, sliding into place, jaw set, expression neutral. Good game, I said. To the air, not specifically to either of them. I picked up my bag. Night. I walked out without looking back. The cold hit me the moment I cleared the doors and I breathed it in slow and long and kept walking. That had almost been something. I knew what it had almost been. I'd felt it in the space between us, that specific weighted stillness, and then Brody had come through the door and the weight had dropped and I'd taken a step back on reflex, because Brody's name was written at the top of a page in my notebook in letters that had nothing to do with warmth. I walked back to the dorm. I changed into sweats. I made tea. I sat on my bed and opened my book and read the same page twice. My phone lit up at 11:14. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it. I got the occasional wrong number, occasional spam. I opened it. One line. He's not what you think he is. Ask him what happened at Lake Morse 3 years ago. I stared at it. I read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. Lake Morse. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know who had sent it. I looked at the number, no area code I recognized, no name attached, nothing. I put the phone face down on the mattress. I picked it up again. I read it one more time and then I set it on my nightstand and lay back and looked at the dark ceiling and thought about the hallway and the almost moment and the way Cole had said my name in a crowd so loud nobody else could have heard it. He's not what you think he is. The thing was, I already knew he wasn't one thing. I'd known that since the seminar. Since the library. Since okay, you're right and the right coffee and the 4 seconds across the ice. He was at least 2 people and I'd been trying to hold both of them in the same frame for weeks. But Lake Morse was something specific. Something with a location and a timeline, 3 years ago, and someone who knew about it and wanted me to ask. I lay there for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and screenshotted the message. I was going to ask him. Not tonight. But I was going to ask. End of. Chapter 16. Cole's POV***. Lake Morse. Cole's chapter, but Dakota hasn't asked him yet. He's dealing with something else. His father has arrived on campus 2 days early, unannounced. The chapter is the most interior Cole has been. We see what he came from, what it cost him, why the performance is so total. His father watches practice and afterward gives Cole a clinical breakdown of everything he did wrong. Cole takes it without flinching. Later, alone, he does the thing he always does, goes to the ice. What Lake Morse actually is 3 years ago, during a freshman hazing ritual Cole didn't participate in but also didn't stop, a student was hurt. Cole reported it, anonymously, after the fact. Brody was the ringleader. The school handled it quietly. Cole never told anyone he was the one who reported it. Brody, somehow, found out. That's why Brody's always operated with this particular edge around Cole, not loyalty, but leverage. A secret kept on both sides. The reader gets a piece of this. Dakota doesn't yet, Chapter 19. Dakota's POV***. Something's wrong. Dakota can feel the shift in Cole before she understands it. He's avoiding her, not with cruelty, with distance. No texts, no library appearances, no eye contact in the hallway. It feels worse than the pranks did. Mara, he's either running away because he likes you or running away because he did something. Dakota, quietly, those aren't mutually exclusive. Tension mounting, she goes looking for him and finds Jens instead, who looks guilty, who knows something. He won't tell her what. Cliffhanger, she corners Brody. She doesn't know why. Some instinct. He looks at her with something that isn't cruelty, it's wariness. Like he's calculating how much she knows. Chapter 23. Choosing again. Dakota's POV. 10 days is a long time to sit with something. Long enough to go through every version of the thing, angry, then sad, then angry again, then something quieter and harder to name that sat below both of those and turned out to be the one that mattered. Long enough to stop telling yourself you're still deciding when you've actually already decided and you're just not ready to move yet. I was ready on a Thursday. But I want to say the 10 days accurately first because I think they matter. The first 2 days I was angry. Clean and cold and fully justified, the kind of angry that doesn't need to perform itself, it just sits there doing its work. He'd endorsed the notes. He'd let me assume the door was him and said nothing. He'd stood with his back against the hallway wall of our dorm building and chosen the performance over the correction every time it mattered. I went to class and ate my meals and talked to Mara and ran 4 miles each morning, and I held the anger carefully because I'd earned it and it was mine. Day 3, the student affairs coordinator called. She was professional and careful, the way they were trained to be, and she told me the office had received new information related to Haverton State's complaint record and asked if I would be willing to provide a written account of my experience. She used the formal language. She gave me the timeline for the process. I asked her if I could have 48 hours. She said of course. I sat with my phone in my lap for a while after the call. I hadn't asked who had brought the new information. I knew. I'd known since Monday morning when Mara had come back in from seeing Jens with the specific expression she got when she was holding something that wasn't hers to give. He'd done it. He'd filed it himself, put his name on it, knowing what it would cost him, the record, the scouts, his father's opinion of him, the reputation he'd spent 2 years building on this campus. He'd done it knowing I might never speak to him again. I sat with that for a long time. Day 4, I went to the student affairs office and I gave them my account. All of it, Haverton, the summer camp, the complaint that had gone nowhere, the transfer, and everything from October at Frost Academy. I said it clearly and completely, and when the coordinator asked if I was okay, I said yes because I was. Not in the easy way, in the hard-won way. In the way that had taken a year and a half and a 3-week period in my childhood bedroom and 4 miles every morning and a notebook with names circled in it and one conversation on the steps of a humanities building in the snow. I was okay. Day 5, Mara made tea and we sat on our beds and she let me talk, and when I got to the part about Cole she listened without telling me what to feel about it, which was the thing I needed most. He didn't know, she said, when I'd finished. I know he didn't know. That matters. I know it matters. I wrapped both hands around my mug. That's actually the complicated part. She looked at me. Because if he'd known, you could just be angry. Yes. But he didn't know, and when he found out he did everything right, and now you have to figure out what you actually feel instead of what you have reason to feel. She paused. Which is harder? Much harder. She nodded. Drank her tea. Said nothing else because there was nothing else to say. Days 6 through 9 I was honest with myself. I'd been good at honesty about most things for a long time. I'd had to be. Self-deception was a luxury that required stable ground, and I'd been living on unstable ground since Haverton. But there were certain specific things I'd been letting myself be less than honest about, and I used those 4 days to look at them directly. I missed the library sessions. Not the project, the sessions themselves. The specific 2 hours of following an argument until it was better than either of us started with. I missed the black coffee that became the right coffee without a word about it. I missed the scar above his eyebrow in the library light and the way he held a book like he was going to use it and the 2-word sentences he used when something was true. I missed "okay, you're right," and I missed him saying my name in a loud hallway because nobody else could hear it. That was real. It had been real for a long time, and I'd been calling it proximity and habit and everything except what it was. I also knew what he'd done in October. And what he hadn't done when he should have. And the stairwell where he'd let me assume he'd ordered the door. Both of those things were also real. They weren't going anywhere. Here's what I kept coming back to, in the honest version. I knew the difference between someone who learned cruelty and someone who was cruel. I'd met the second kind at Haverton, the person for whom the harm was the point, who got something from it, who did it because some part of them needed to. I knew what that looked like up close. I had the institutional complaint form to prove it. Cole had learned cruelty the way he'd learned everything, by example, by necessity, by building a performance so complete that he'd stopped being able to see where it ended and he began. He'd done real harm with it. That was also true. I wasn't going to make it smaller than it was. But the person on the steps in the snow. The person in the library at 7 on a Friday night. The person who'd knocked on my door at 7:30 in the morning and laid everything flat without asking for anything. That person was real too. And I knew, I'd known since the library, since the right coffee, since "okay, you're right," that that person was the actual one. I picked up my phone on day 9 and looked at his name in my contacts for a long time. I didn't text him. Not because I wasn't ready, because what I needed to say wasn't something I could say in a text. What I needed to say required the same thing everything real between us had required. The same space. The same quiet. I needed to go to where he was most himself. I set my alarm for 4:30 on Thursday morning. Mara was asleep. I got up in the dark and put on the warmest clothes I owned, thermals under my jeans, 2 sweatshirts, my heaviest coat, 2 pairs of socks. I found the hat I hadn't worn since I arrived at Frost Academy, wool, pulled down over my ears. I walked across campus in the dark. The rink was unlocked at 5, public access started at 5, I'd looked it up. The door opened when I pushed it and the cold hit me immediately, that particular sharp cold that lived in the ice and nowhere else. I went in and stood at the boards and looked out at the ice. I couldn't skate. I'd never learned. I was a girl from a town that didn't have a rink, who'd come to a hockey school by scholarship and landed in the middle of a world I'd had to learn from the outside. I was standing at the edge of it in my boots, which were going to do absolutely nothing on the ice, and I was going to wait. The lights were off except for the 2 above center ice that stayed on overnight. The rink was blue-gray and still and cold and so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. I waited. At 5:03 I heard the door. I didn't turn around. I heard his footsteps on the rubber mat, the familiar sound of someone who knew this building the way they knew their own body, no hesitation, no adjustment. Then the footsteps stopped. I turned. He was at the far boards, skates in hand, jacket on. He was looking at me with an expression I'd seen exactly once before, in the stairwell, first week, when I'd said probably and walked away. The expression he got when something had caught him entirely off guard and he hadn't had time to manage it. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The rink was between us, the whole width of it, the blue ice pail in the low light, both of us at opposite boards. "You said the ice doesn't lie," I said. My voice carried in the cold air. Clear and even, the way I'd practiced in the walkover, not rehearsed, just ready. He was very still. "Yeah," he said. Quiet. The word landing in the space between us. I looked at the ice. At the boards under my hands. At the distance between where I was standing and where he was, and all the ice between. "Teach me," I said. He stood there for a moment. Then he sat down on the bench and started lacing up his skates. I watched his hands move through the laces, quick, practiced, the same motion he'd probably made 10,000 times. When he was done he stood and came around the boards and stepped onto the ice and crossed to where I was standing. He stopped in front of me. Up close his face was the open version. The real one. No performance, no management, no captaincy. Just him, standing on the ice at 5 in the morning, looking at me with something in his eyes that was careful and clear and entirely unguarded. He held out his hand. I looked at it. Then I looked at his face. I took it. End of Chapter 21. Dakota's POV ***. The truth. Cole finds her. Not at the library, not with plausible deniability, he knocks on her dorm room door. Mara opens it, looks at his face, looks at Dakota, and leaves without a word. Cole tells her what he found. All of it. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't position himself. He lays it out flat, what he found, what he pieced together, what he did about it, and what he was complicit in without knowing it. And then, "I'm sorry." Not as an explanation. Just, "I'm sorry." Dakota's response is not forgiveness. Not yet. She asks him to leave. He does. Emotional climax of the book, not the romantic resolution, but the human one. Chapter 22. Cole's POV ***. The ice tells the truth. Cole plays the most important game of the season with scouts and his father in the stands. He plays the worst first period of his college career, not because he doesn't care, but because for the first time in his life, hockey is not the only thing. In the second period, his father sends a scorching text. Cole puts his phone face down. He skates the third period for himself. It's the best hockey he's played all year. They win. His father is waiting after a loaded silence. Cole says, I'm not going into the NHL because you need me to. I'm going because I love it. There's a difference. His father leaves without a response. Cole stands in the empty rink afterward, chest cracked open and finally breathing. His complete internal arc resolves on his own terms, before, not because of, the romance. Chapter 24. Cole's POV***. Breakaway, climax and falling action. He teaches her. She's terrible. She grabs his arm and doesn't let go, and they make it roughly 12 feet before she almost takes him down with her. They end up on the ice together, breathless, and he's laughing, actually laughing, and she's looking at him like she's finally seeing the whole picture, not just the pieces she was given. They stay on the ice for 2 hours. He holds her hand and doesn't let go even when she finds her footing. At the end, standing at the boards, she says, I'm not forgiving the pranks. Cole, I know. I'm not saying we're fine. Cole, I know. I'm saying I see you. The real one. He kisses her. She kisses him back. The ice is cold and blue and the rink lights are still on from the night before. Epilogue. Spring ice. Dakota's POV. April is mud season at Frost Academy. The snow goes dirty before it leaves, gray at the edges, soft in the middle, hanging on longer than it should because upstate New York has its own opinion about when winter is over. The path between the housing block and the humanities building turns to mud for about 3 weeks in late March, and then one morning you come out and the ground is solid and there's something green at the base of the oak trees and the air smells different, and that's how you know. I'd been here for 6 months. I knew the campus the way you know a place once it stops being new, not just the map of it but the feel of it, the specific quality of the light in the afternoon through the library windows, the way the dining hall smelled on Tuesday mornings, the drag at the far blue line in the rink that nobody fixed. I was still bad at skating. Better than I'd been in November, a low bar, but a real one. I'd been going to the rink on Thursday mornings, public session, 7 to 9, with second-year figure skaters who were learning jumps while I was learning not to fall sideways. I fell forward now mostly, which was progress. I'd made it the full length of the ice and back twice without holding on. Cole had been there for one of those. He'd watched from the boards with his coffee and his expression that didn't give much away, and when I made it back to the boards he said, "Better," and I said, "I know," and that was enough. The disciplinary process for Brody was still ongoing as of April. These things moved slowly. I'd learned that in the Haverton process too, the institution's timeline had nothing to do with the speed of what happened to you, and you had to make a kind of peace with that or it would eat you. I'd submitted my written account in November. I'd had 2 follow-up meetings. In February I'd gotten a formal update letter from the Student Affairs Office that used language I'd been trained to parse by now: active review, procedural requirements, anticipated resolution by end of academic year. It was costing me something to stay in it. I knew that clearly and I stayed anyway. I decided at the very beginning that I was done leaving things to be handled quietly, and I meant it. It was also giving me something back. Not the process was exhausting and impersonal and handled by people who cared about liability as much as anything else. What it was giving me was simpler than that. The knowledge that I'd said the true thing on record, with my name on it, and not left. I'd told Mara that in February. She'd nodded and said, "Yeah," and gone back to her case notes. That was the right response. She'd been the right response to most things. She had, at some point in the last 3 months, become begrudgingly fond of Jens. She would not confirm this directly. But he texted her about case studies she was working on, which she claimed was purely academic networking, and they studied in the library together on Wednesday afternoons, which she claimed was about the table space, and when I'd suggested once that she seemed to genuinely like him she'd said, "He's tolerable," which in Mara's vocabulary was approximately equivalent to devotion. I didn't push it. Some things got to be what they were without being named. The hockey season ended in March. Frost Academy made the conference tournament and went 2 rounds before losing to a school from Michigan that outmuscled them in overtime. Cole played well through all of it. The scout visit had gone whatever good was, because in February the Bellevue organization had reached out to Harlan for a formal conversation, and Cole had come back from a meeting with Harlan looking like a person who'd had something confirmed that they'd been afraid to fully believe. I'd asked him how it went. He'd said, "Good," and then he'd looked at me with the face, not the performance face, the real one, and said, "I played that third period for myself. Not for Reimer. Not for my dad. For me." He paused. "First time. How did it feel?" "Terrifying," he said. "Better than anything." His dad had called in February. I hadn't been in the room for the conversation, but Cole had told me about it after, sitting on his bed with his elbows on his knees and his voice careful and honest. His dad had said one thing about the disciplinary record, just one, clinical, about how it would need to be disclosed to organizations, and then he'd moved on. Which wasn't warmth exactly and wasn't acceptance exactly and wasn't the version of fatherhood that Cole deserved, but it was something other than the full weight of disapproval, and Cole had let it be what it was without asking it to be more. He was getting better at that. Letting things be what they were. We both were. It was a Tuesday in April. I was at my desk working through a reading for the next day's seminar, a new class, a new professor, the kind of dense academic prose that required coffee and concentration and the specific silence of early morning. I'd been up since 6:30. The campus outside the window was doing the mud season thing, the path still soft, the oak trees showing the first thin green. The coffee was on my desk when I sat down. It had been there when I came back from the bathroom. Hot, the right temperature, in the cup from the cart near the humanities building that did the good milk. I'd noticed the first time, a Tuesday in late January, 2 weeks after the rink, neither of us having named most of what was happening yet. He'd been up early for a morning skate and he'd just left it there, gone back to his book on the other side of the room, said nothing. I'd said nothing either. I'd drunk it. It was right, the milk, the amount, pale and slightly sweet. It had been right every Tuesday since. And some Thursdays. And once on a Saturday when I'd stayed late in the library and come back at midnight and found it on the nightstand next to my phone, still warm in one of the insulated cups from the vending hall. He never mentioned it. I never mentioned it. I turned in the desk chair. He was on my bed with his back against the wall and his book open on his knees, reading with that particular focused stillness that meant he was all the way in it. His jacket was on my desk chair. His shoes were on the floor. He was comfortable in my room in the way that had happened gradually and without announcement, just more times here than not, until here was just a place he was. I looked at him for a moment. "You've been getting the coffee right," I said. He didn't look up. He turned a page. 4 weeks. Every time. He kept reading. Cole. He looked up. His eyes met mine directly, the way they always did, no adjustment, no preparation, just contact. The pale blue that I'd clocked from 20 feet away on the first day and had been looking at in increasingly close proximity ever since. "I've always known how you take your coffee," he said. I looked at him. "Since the first week," he said. "You told Brody in the dining hall that the coffee was the one thing you'd managed to get right that morning. Black was wrong. Needed a lot of milk." He paused. I remembered it. I thought about that Tuesday in the library. The third meeting. The black coffee I'd drunk without saying anything, telling myself it was concession, telling myself it was practicality. The 7 times after that when it was still wrong. "You brought it wrong on purpose," I said. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, less than that, more controlled, the shape that a smile left when it passed through and didn't fully land. "I was waiting to see what you'd do." I drank it without complaining. "I know." That told me something. I stared at him. "You're infuriating." "I know that too." "That's annoyingly sweet, Callahan." The smile made it to his face this time. Real, unhurried, the one I'd seen for the first time on the ice in November when we were both flat on our backs and laughing too hard to be careful about it. The one he didn't manage. The one that was just his. "Don't tell anyone," he said. He went back to his book. I turned back to my desk. I sat there for a moment with my hands around the coffee cup, right milk, right temperature, right everything, and I looked out the window at the mud and the thin green and the April light coming in sideways across the campus. 6 months ago I'd arrived at this school with 2 days of packing behind me and the specific kind of nothing left to lose that either breaks you for good or turns you into something that can't be broken the same way twice. I'd walked into a dining hall and sat at the wrong table and looked at a boy across a room who was deciding something behind his eyes, and I'd thought, I don't like how that feels. I'd been right. I hadn't liked it. I hadn't liked a lot of what came after. The notes, the whiteboard, the door, the months of holding the anger and the other thing at the same time and not knowing which one was going to win. Here's what I knew now, on a Tuesday in April with the spring coming in through the window and the right coffee in my hands. Both of them won. That was the thing nobody told you, that you could be angry and right about what someone did and also see who they actually were and choose that person anyway. That choosing again was harder than choosing the first time and more worth it. That the ice, as it turned out, didn't lie. And that sometimes the realest thing you had was sitting on the other side of a room reading a book and pretending not to watch you figure all of this out. I smiled. I didn't press my fingers against my mouth to stop it. I let it happen. Somewhere under the building, 4 stories down, the rink held the cold the way it always did, steady, honest, flat and true. All those blade marks in the ice. All those 5 a.m. sessions and the one Thursday in November when I'd stood at the boards in my boots and waited. The ice held all of it without judgment. I drank my coffee. Tuesday morning, April, mud season, the thin green coming in. Enough. End of. Author's note. Dear reader, thank you for spending your time with this story. When I first imagined these characters, I wanted to write about people who understand pressure, the kind that comes from the outside, from family, from expectations, and what happens when the walls they've built start cracking open. This story is about the courage it takes to be seen. Not the curated version. The real one. The messy, imperfect, terrified one. I hope that resonated with you. If this book made you feel something, I'd be grateful if you left a review. Reviews help readers find stories like this, and every one means the world to me. With gratitude. Hadley Prescott. Acknowledgements. Every book begins with a quiet question. I'm grateful to everyone who helped me find the answer. To my readers, you took a chance on this story, and I couldn't be more thankful. Your messages, your reviews, your enthusiasm, they fuel every late-night writing session. To anyone who has ever built something from nothing, a career, a relationship, a second chance, this one's for you. And to the cold coffee that got me through every draft, you were terrible, and I wouldn't change a thing. About the author. Hadley Prescott writes emotionally charged contemporary romance that lives in the space between heartbreak and hope. She believes the best love stories start with 2 people who are certain they want nothing to do with each other. When not writing, she can be found drinking coffee that went cold hours ago and arguing about sports with strangers on the internet. She lives with 2 cats who judge her word count daily.